I couldn't bear the thought of being trapped with a man who looked at my pregnant belly with such disdain, as though the very sight of me at 9 months filled him with revulsion. The cruel smile he wore only added to the bitterness. He seemed to relish this moment as if anticipating it all along. Not wanting to endure another second of his disdain, I quickly went to my room, retrieved a set of papers, and thrust them into his hands. "Divorce papers," I said curtly. Brian's face twisted in shock. "What the hell is this? Out of nowhere?" I met his anger with a steely gaze. "This was your idea, Brian. Now sign them. I'll be filing them first thing tomorrow." My voice didn't waver, even as his face flushed with fury. "You'll regret this," I added, my resolve unwavering. "Watch closely, because you'll see what it's like to be treated the way you've treated me. Let me introduce myself. My name is Linda, a 27-year-old former housewife. 3 years ago, I worked at a mobile company where I met Brian, my boss at the time. Back then, I was 25, eager to learn and grateful for Brian's guidance as a newcomer to the job. It didn't take long for our professional relationship to evolve into friendship. Soon, dinner outings turned into dates, and eventually he asked me out. I was thrilled. I had never dated anyone before. It's a little embarrassing to admit, but I was more captivated by cartoon characters than real men. Yet seeing my friends marry one by one, I felt pressured to find my own partner. When Brian entered my life, I secretly promised myself he'd be my first and only love. We married a year later, and I couldn't have been happier. Brian was handsome, popular, and the envy of many female coworkers. I felt proud to be his wife as colleagues congratulated us. Their words of admiration made me feel like I had achieved something special. I was blissfully unaware of what lay ahead. The day after our marriage registration, Brian dropped a bombshell. "You're married to me now, so you'll quit your job, right?" he said nonchalantly. I stared at him in disbelief. "I've already informed them," he added with unnerving finality. "What? But you never mentioned this before." I protested, caught off guard. Brian's stern expression silenced me. "Starting tomorrow, you won't need to go to work. I'll handle the handover." His words were like a guillotine slicing through the life I'd built. The decision had been made without me. Brian's role as my former boss made it even harder to argue. Reluctantly, I quit my job without saying proper goodbyes, determined to make our marriage work. At home, I threw myself into household chores, preparing Brian's favorite meals and trying to meet his expectations. Yet, no matter how hard I worked, he never acknowledged my efforts. I craved even a single word of appreciation, but none came. Without a personal income, I was completely reliant on him, and our relationship started to feel less like a marriage and more like that of an employer and his housemaid. Things took a turn for the worse when I fell ill one day. Exhausted and feverish, I stayed in bed, promising myself I'd catch up on the chores later. Brian stormed into the bedroom, furious. "What are you doing lying there? Get up and make some food," he barked, yanking the blanket off me. "I'm not feeling well," I murmured, hoping for compassion. "Could you handle things yourself today?" His response chilled me to the bone. "Pathetic. You don't work, and now you're lying around because of a little cold." Tears blurred my vision as I forced myself out of bed. I couldn't believe this was the same man I had fallen in love with. Overwhelmed, I completed the housework, tears streaming down my face. Several days later, I realized I'd missed my period. A pregnancy test confirmed it. I was expecting. Overjoyed, I cried tears of happiness, eager to share the news with Brian. But when he came home late one night, the smell of alcohol on his breath, my excitement dimmed. "I have something important to tell you," I began hesitantly. "I haven't seen a doctor yet, but I think I'm pregnant." Brian's expression darkened instantly. "Pregnant? What the hell have you done?" His harsh tone cut me to the core. "I don't want a child. If you're going to have it, you'll be raising it alone." He spat before storming off to the bathroom. I stood there stunned. This wasn't the life I had dreamed of. This wasn't the man I thought I had married. I couldn't understand why Brian would say such cruel and irresponsible things about our baby. Moments earlier, I'd been filled with joy at the thought of becoming a mother. But his words shattered that happiness, leaving me in a pit of sorrow. Why would he react like this? He had never mentioned not wanting children before. We hadn't even been using contraception, so I'd naturally assumed he wanted kids too. As I ironed Brian's jacket and prepared to take his shirt to the wash, a wave of sadness overwhelmed me. Then something unexpected happened. A small piece of paper fell from his dress shirt pocket. I picked it up absent-mindedly, thinking it might be a receipt from his outing that night. I almost threw it away, but something caught my eye. The name on the receipt made my heart stop. A motel. My hands trembled as I stared at the incriminating slip of paper, confirming what I didn't want to believe. It was indeed a receipt from a motel. The shock hit me like a physical blow. Why would Brian go to a motel? Isn't marriage supposed to be a sacred bond between two people who love each other? We'd only been married for a little over a year. How could this happen? I was no stranger to romantic fantasies, having spent years dreaming of perfect love rather than experiencing real relationships. But now, faced with this harsh reality, I struggled to accept what was unfolding before me. The possibility that Brian was cheating began to make horrifying sense. Had he been using me from the start? Was he in love with someone else while I played the role of a convenient housemaid? Was this why he reacted so coldly to my pregnancy? These doubts swirled in my mind, and I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that there was more to Brian's behavior than met the eye. As I grappled with these thoughts, nausea swept over me, not just from morning sickness, but from the realization that my husband might have betrayed me. Perhaps his insistence that I quit my job had a sinister purpose. Maybe his mistress worked there, and he needed me out of the way. Everything seemed to click into place, and my mind blurred the lines between reality and suspicion. But the heartless words Brian had hurled at me when he learned of my pregnancy were undeniable. That day, I resolved to uncover the truth. From then on, I observed Brian's behavior with new eyes. His coldness was impossible to ignore. It was as if he resented me for becoming pregnant. Despite knowing how sick I felt, he would eat smelly foods near me, criticize my housework, and force me to redo tasks. My pregnant body endured his cruelty while my heart grew heavier by the day. But I didn't let it deter me. I began investigating his infidelity. Brian guarded his phone fiercely, never parting with it, even taking it to the bathroom, making it nearly impossible to check. I searched his pockets, hoping for more receipts or clues, but my efforts were fruitless. I even considered hiring a private investigator, but without any personal income, I couldn't afford such a step. Just when I felt trapped in my search for answers, an unexpected lifeline arrived. One day, my phone rang. It was my father. "Dad?" I said, surprised. His busy schedule rarely allowed for casual calls. "Hi, Linda. How are you?" he asked warmly. "Everything's fine," I lied. "Is something wrong? Aren't you busy with work?" "My employees are handling things well, so I'm taking it easy," he replied. My father, the CEO of a company in England, had always been a workaholic. His call was unexpected. "What's going on?" I asked, curious. Then came the shocking revelation. He told me something that made my world tilt. "Is that true?" I asked, struggling to believe what I was hearing. "Yes," he said firmly. "I wouldn't lie to you. Trust me on this." The pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. Though initially stunned, I felt a strange sense of relief. "Thank you, Dad. I'll handle it from here," I said, my voice steady with newfound resolve. The truth emboldened me, but it also reignited my anger. As the months passed, Brian's behavior remained distant and cold. His disdain for me and our unborn child never wavered, and each interaction deepened my hatred for him. At 9 months pregnant, I was always cautious around Brian, living in constant apprehension. One evening, I served dinner as usual, hoping to avoid any confrontation. But as we sat at the table, Brian suddenly slammed his fork down. "What is this? It's tasteless," he exclaimed, throwing the plate of food onto the floor. I froze, baffled by his outburst. Anger began to well up inside me as I looked at the discarded meal I had painstakingly prepared. "I've been meaning to say this," Brian continued, his tone laced with contempt. "Your cooking has been terrible lately." Tears stunned my eyes, but I held them back. Since becoming pregnant, I had deliberately used less seasoning to ensure healthier meals for our baby. This was only temporary, and he could easily have added salt to his portion if he wanted. But instead, he chose to humiliate me. Why? Why did he have to treat me like this? I was about to respond to Brian's harsh words when he sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "You're a woman with a belly like a monster. You'll have to raise this kid on your own." His cruel smile sent a chill down my spine. Though I had always feared this day might come, I had clung to a sliver of hope for a better outcome. Without hesitation, I went to my room, grabbed a document, and returned to him. "Here are the divorce papers," I said, thrusting the papers in front of him. Brian's face twisted in shock as he stammered, "What the hell? What's this all of a sudden?" "It was your idea," I replied firmly. "Now sign them. I'll be submitting them tomorrow." I had been contemplating divorce ever since I started suspecting Brian's infidelity, but with a baby on the way, I hadn't been sure I could support myself. Now, with a new plan in mind, my resolve was unshakable. My determination seemed to provoke him. His face flushed red with anger as he snarled, "Just watch. I'll make you regret this. Do you think you can survive without me? You've got a baby to take care of. You'll regret it." Unfazed, I held my ground. "I'll be fine. Don't worry about me," I said calmly. Irritated by my confidence, Brian snatched the papers and begrudgingly began to fill them out. "Here. If this is what you wanted, take it," he spat. "Thank you," I replied, my tone steady. Brian likely didn't believe I'd actually submit the papers, but the next day, I did just that and left the house. I moved to my parents' home, where my father, recently returned from England, had suggested I stay. It was the right decision. I was fed up with my life with Brian, and my father's support was invaluable. That day, Brian called me 5 times. I ignored every call. Eventually, he stopped trying, and it became painfully clear how little I meant to him. He was probably content with his mistress and might even remarry soon. I resolved to move on from him entirely. 5 months later, I gave birth to a healthy baby and settled into a peaceful life with my parents. Parenthood brought me joy, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly content. Then Brian called again. At first, I ignored his persistent attempts to reach me, but after several calls, I finally picked up, weary of his intrusion. "What do you want now?" I asked, my tone flat. "Hey, what's going on? Why were you on that show? And since when are you the daughter of a CEO with millions of dollars?" Brian's voice was a mix of surprise and anger. Unbeknownst to me, Brian had seen a TV show that aired after I moved back home. The program, which featured my family, highlighted my father's role as the CEO of a global tech company and estimated our family's wealth at $20 million. I hadn't anticipated Brian watching it, but TV has a way of reaching unexpected audiences. "Oh, by the way," I said nonchalantly, "I didn't tell you about my $38 million inheritance. That's why I was able to divorce you." Brian was furious. "What? That's absurd. Why didn't you tell me before? Half of that is mine, right? Give me the money now." I laughed coldly. Just as I thought. After seeing the show, all you care about is money. Gifts from parents aren't included in the property split. And don't forget your own wrongdoings, Brian. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice tinged with unease. "I'm tired of your antics," I said, my patience wearing thin. "You cheated on me, didn't you? With your new wife, your junior from work. You started dating her even before we were married." Brian was clearly shocked. He hadn't expected me to know the truth. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" I continued. "My father has connections everywhere, including in your company. I've known for a long time." I paused before delivering my final blow. "By the way, I'll be demanding child support." Brian's anger turned to denial. "Stop kidding. Why should I pay child support? You got pregnant on your own and slacked off on housework. It's all your fault." I couldn't believe I had once loved someone so devoid of common sense. Leaving him was the best decision I had ever made. "Brian," I said with a mix of anger and exhaustion, "do you even hear yourself? I'll have my lawyer handle child support. Never call me again, and you'll never see the child. Goodbye." I hung up and blocked his number, feeling a wave of relief. It was finally over. Later, I learned from a former colleague of his that Brian was struggling. His new wife was a reckless spender, and he had plunged into debt trying to keep up with her lifestyle. He had hoped to get a share of my inheritance to ease his burdens, but his plan failed miserably. While Brian wrestled with the consequences of his actions, I thrived. My father offered me a position in his company, promising to pass it down to me one day. I embraced the opportunity, ready to build a future for myself and my child. After all, I am my hardworking father's daughter.